I'd like to talk to you today about air cargo. We'll also go into some of the trends and some of the opportunities for the future. We are very much operating in a world where tariffs and trade tensions are reshaping global supply chains. There's been trade fragmentation increasing, and it's increased the demand for responsive logistics. Air cargo is the safety valve when global trade gets disrupted. The era of predictable, stable tariff global trade has given way to a far more fragmented environment. Escalating tariffs, particularly between major economies like the United States and China, are forcing companies to reconfigure sourcing, manufacturing, and their distribution patterns. Goods that once followed stable routes are now moving through new corridors, sometimes shifting quickly as tariff policies change. These shifts often increase reliance on air cargo because air is the mode that can adapt the fastest when trade flows are disrupted or rerouted. For many industries, tariffs have introduced uncertainty and volatility into the logistics planning. For example, last-minute supplier changes, rerouting to avoid tariff-heavy markets. And in each of those cases, air cargo becomes the bridge that keeps supply chains functioning while companies adjust. So in this fragmented, tariff-affected world, agility isn't an option, it's essential. Air cargo provides the speed, the flexibility, and the reroute capability needed for supply chains to stay resilient amid policy swings. And it's also uniquely positioned to provide the flexibility that modern supply chains require. Unlike ocean or land transport, air can reroute quickly, shift capacity between markets, and deliver urgent goods at speed. During disruptions, whether those are tariff-driven, geopolitical, or natural, air cargo is the mode that keeps supply chains moving. Ensuring that we continue to have a reliable, agile air cargo industry is increasingly critical as trade becomes more fragmented. So with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague Julia for the economic update.
Thank you very much, Brandon. So yeah, as Brandon mentioned, 2025 has been a year of dramatic shifts in trade policy that have had important consequences both for, of course, international trade flows, but also for international cargo traffic. The most significant driver of this has been, of course, the US trade policy, where we've seen tariffs soaring to levels that are unprecedented since almost a century ago. So as you can see in the chart, the last peak was before World War II in 1933, with 20% average tariffs on US imports. Since then, the tariffs have been going down slowly, and in the last 3 decades, since the mid-90s, actually we haven't seen import tariffs on average of above 3%. So really this spike this year to 17% in 2025 is a quite dramatic rise. And of course, this unusual hike in tariffs has had immediate effects on, first of all, US imports themselves. So what we can see here is that in the first quarter, when we compare each month to the month of the previous year, the US imports have grown really very strongly. And this is this famous period of what was denominated front-loading. So basically businesses tried to rush in goods into the US before the tariffs would kick in. And this surged up to more than 30% of the value of the previous year. Then once tariffs took effect in April, monthly imports of the US returned to 2024 levels, and then even declined by more than 5% in August, again comparing to 2024 levels. And so this was in a context where global trade was still growing, so not driven by something more global, but really by those tariff hikes. And beyond the US, those tariffs even had impacts on global trade more generally, and for example, Chinese exports. So what we can see here is that between January and August of this year, China's exports to the United States, which is of course a major export market for China, declined by more than 15%. However, this was more than made up by increasing exports to other Asian destinations, but also to the European Union. And so in total, what we saw is that China's exports increased by 5.8% compared to the previous year in that period. And even since August, Chinese exports have been evolving positively, which led the country to reach a trade surplus of more than 1 trillion for the first time this year by the end of November, actually. So what do these shifts in international trade actually mean for air cargo? A first thing that is crucial to recognize is air cargo's unique role as an enabler of trade by value. Because first thing, if we look on the graph on the right-hand side, which is trade by volume or in kilograms, there the role of air cargo seems rather small, with less than 1% of total trade. However, once we look at the percentage of trade in value terms, we reach almost 25% for the sample of countries we are looking at here, and sometimes it can even be more, depending really on the countries one looks at. And so why is this the case? This is because air cargo is really the preferred mode of transport for goods that are high value, time sensitive, or that require special handling. So we can think of AI-related goods such as microchips and semiconductors. We can think of pharmaceuticals and perishables, but also precious metals and things like that. And then a second thing to look at on top of its importance for international trade, it's also interesting to note how air cargo moves when trade moves. Basically, when we look at this time series, which starts in 2000, what we can observe is that whenever international trade drops or rises very sharply, air cargo also does the same, but even more strongly. And what this actually means is that air cargo acts as an enabler, that it helps businesses react quickly to new economic conditions or to new challenges, because it's, of course, far more agile than other modes of transport. So how did this all play out then in 2025? So what we can see here is actually the evolution again month by month compared to 2024 values for total trade, trade by sea and trade by air. And it really sticks out immediately that trade by air, the yellow bars here, was really consistently above 2024 values in every single month of 2025. And it even peaked at almost 40% more than 2024 in March, which was the peak of the front-loading season, as you may recall from the slide on US imports. And what is particularly striking here is the contrast with maritime transport, so the red bars that are maybe barely visible for people sitting in the back because they are so small, because maritime trade reacted very little and even declined a little bit overall from January to August this year. So again, the takeaway here is that air cargo plays a vital role as an enabler of international trade, because it enables businesses to really swiftly transport high value and special handling goods and ensure rapid delivery and allow companies to react quickly to new challenges. And that's exactly what happened in 2025, where air cargo was really critical to help businesses adapt to the new and ever-changing trade policy environment. And how did then these trends in international trade by value, translate into air cargo movements themselves, which we measure here in cargo ton kilometers? Well, as we can see in this time series, air cargo continued its growth trajectory and reached actually an all-time high of 25.4 billion cargo ton kilometers in October. Then if we look at the different routes, we can actually see very similar patterns to what happened in international trade. So if we take again the example of China's exports to the US, that would be equivalent to the route Far East North America, where of course US and China are the biggest economies. And that's the bar on the very right of this chart, which means occasionally that among the 15 largest pairs, it was the one that experienced the slowest growth, which here was even a decrease by more than $500 million CTK in 2025 year to date. However, this was again more than compensated by the Far East Europe route, which is on the very left and which grew by even more than 4 billion during the same time period. So this rerouting that we saw happening in international trade also is mirrored in air cargo, and that's largely again because it's actually air cargo that makes this all possible. Then finally, looking ahead, so for 2025, we expect our air cargo to grow overall by 3.1%, and then for 2026, we expect it to stabilize at 2.6% growth in a context where international trade is actually projected to slow down. So international trade is actually projected to slow down much more and to grow by only 0.5% next year. However, we still expect air cargo to experience more solid growth in comparison, as it will benefit from AI-driven investment, growing demand for high-value and time-sensitive goods, and also the continuing structural shift towards e-commerce. If we look at the regions, growth has been and continues to be mainly driven by the Asia-Pacific region and also Europe. Africa and Latin America have also performed quite well, and I expect it to continue growing further next year. And then in contrast, we see that the Middle East and North America have declined in 2025. For the Middle East, this was more a story of a particularly strong 2024 and things normalizing a bit, especially in terms of actually constraints to maritime traffic in the Red Sea that then where then air cargo kind of stepped in and made up for it, and that are more or less solved now. For North America, however, this is more related to the trade policy changes, and the decline is likely to continue into next year. So in sum, what we've seen in 25 is really the vital role of air cargo as an enabler of global trade that helped businesses adapt to policy shocks, and we do expect air cargo to continue playing this role next year and of course beyond. And with that, I hand back to Brendan.
Thank you very much. So as we see and have seen through that data, air cargo has adjusted very quickly to the trade flow changes throughout 2025. That said, there are still areas where the industry can improve its agility, its efficiency, and overall provide a more simpler flow for goods and trade. First, air cargo still relies fairly heavily on paper-based processes, and all of these create inefficiencies. They create delays, and they create ultimately higher costs for all parties involved. Equally, those same paper processes add complexity when we are trying to adapt to trade flows, when individual players are entering new markets, and then trying to scale operations in these new locations. Using digitalized practices enables streamlining of operations, it reduces the errors, and it enables significantly faster decision making. The industry needs consistent standards to do that and to make digital adoption universal. On the regulatory side, the current cargo security regimes are outdated and at least inconsistently applied when implemented. So there's uneven use of the consignment security declaration, and that creates gaps and duplication in processes. In a survey that we performed in 2022, less than 50% of the countries that we surveyed actually accepted the electronic version of the consignment security declaration, instead requiring the paper-based version. So we need to align the usage of these more modern practices and ensure that we have a simple and aligned regulatory process around the world. Similar to the regulatory side are the processes that the air cargo industry uses. Today, every country has their own rules and documentation requirements, and that lack of harmonization then adds complexity, and it slows down global cargo movement. Speed being one of air cargo's greatest offerings. Aligning the regulations and the processes across borders will reduce friction and improve predictability. Despite its importance, air cargo is being pushed to the back of the queue when it comes to airport slots. Cargo carriers will frequently struggle to obtain historic or permanent air cargo slots, unlike passenger airlines. Some major hubs restrict cargo operations to temporary or ad hoc slots. Bogota and Dubai are some key examples there. Airports like Heathrow and Gatwick also do not grant historic slots to cargo, which limits flexibility. Then there are local rules that further complicate operations. For example, shorter parking limits, curfews, separation windows, and even outright bans, for example, as we saw in Mexico City and in Mumbai. These slot disadvantages stem from local rules, not international standards. The global standard, which is the IATA Worldwide Airport Slot Guidelines, is very clear. Slot allocation must be fair, non-discriminatory, and transparent regardless of the type of operation. And so the solution really is fair access. What we want is alignment with the WASG principles so that all operators, passenger and cargo, can compete on equal terms, allowing airlines to best align with consumer demand in both passenger and cargo. This matters even more now as global commerce accelerates. E-commerce continues to grow. Demand for rapid, reliable air freight is only increasing. If cargo is squeezed out of key airports, ultimately economies suffer, supply chains slow, and consumers feel those consequences, from higher costs all the way to longer delivery times. Now, we're also working on solutions to address some of these challenges. On the digitalization front, we've developed a standard called One Record, and this is about creating a single common digital language for air cargo, making it easier for all partners to connect, share, and operate effectively, instead of fragmented systems and antiquated messaging exchange. We have a single source of truth that enables real-time data sharing between airlines, freight forwarders, regulators, and all of their partners at the airport, including handling. And this is critical for rapid changes in the industry, because when we all work off of the same data, we reduce errors, we speed up the processes, and we unlock the ability to offer new digital services. Automation inside the warehouse, as well as automation in processes and artificial intelligence, are really transforming air cargo operations at the moment. And data, in particular structured data, as we find in the One Record standard, is what is the backbone and what is enabling all of that. We think of smart hubs where there's predictive analytics that optimize warehouse space or truck arrival times and really smooth out all the scheduling bottlenecks that may occur. And it's not just about efficiency, it's about resilience and scalability in a world where we have demand that can shift essentially overnight. I talked a little bit about the Cargo Security Declaration. It's a vital document for compliance, but today it's quite manual and it's inconsistently applied around the world. What we're working on is modernizing the Cargo Security Declaration. That means digitizing it and harmonizing it across jurisdictions, which makes security processes faster, reduces paperwork, and ensures compliance without slowing down any of the cargo flows. Safety is still our #1 priority. It's an absolute non-negotiable, and ICAO's Annex 18 governs the safe transport of dangerous goods. And it is undergoing a modernization that ensures the regulations reflect today's reality of multiple players across the supply chain, each with a role to play in managing risk. So it will also reflect digital documentation, enable automated checks to be performed, and better risk management, because each party will understand more accurately what their role is with regard to safety across the entire supply chain. By updating these standards, we strengthen the entire supply chain against any emerging risk, and we encourage the states who will vote on these amendments to endorse the changes and also look at their existing supply chain dynamics and determine and empower the agencies that are there to take the primary oversight responsibility. As we wrap up the cargo session, I'd like to just take a step back and look at the bigger picture on why modernization and agility are not optional, and they're essential for surviving in today's trade environment. As we heard, as we saw through the data, global trade is no longer predictable. Tariffs, geopolitical tensions, and supply chain diversification are reshaping routes and volumes almost overnight. This volatility means businesses need flexibility, and air cargo is uniquely positioned to deliver that. We think of air cargo as the shock absorber for global disruption. When ocean freight slows down, when borders tighten, when demand spikes, air cargo steps in to keep the goods moving. This role has never been more critical. We're not just moving boxes, we're enabling resilience for global trade. The ability for cargo to continue to adapt quickly doesn't happen by accident. It requires investment in 3 key areas. One, around data and data standards. As I mentioned, One Record creates a common language for the entire industry, making it easier for airlines and freight forwarders, ground handlers and shippers to share data and coordinate actions across common language. Equally, modernizing the security processes ensures that we have speed without compromising compliance and security. And smarter facilities and AI-driven operations make cargo facilities faster, safer, and more scalable. Air cargo is not just a mode of transport, it's a strategic enabler for global trade. By embracing modernization, we ensure that agility remains our greatest strength in a world of constant disruption. Thank you.
Now open the floor for any questions. Chris? We need a mic. Brendan didn't make it work out. Yeah. It's the trouble table, sorry.
Hi, Chris Jasper from Telegraph. You mentioned this shock absorber effect, but clearly when you last gave the profit outlook in the summer, I think you were anticipating a major impact from tariffs. So is this outcome where we're seeing a really hefty increase in the full year profit outlook for the wider industry, based largely on cargo, is that due to ultimately Trump backing off the worst of those tariffs, or has air cargo picked up more slack than you anticipated it would?
I'll answer a little bit, and then I think I'll hand over to Julia. So I think we're seeing a few things. We are seeing the incredibly dynamic shifting of those tariffs, right? So it was incredibly strong positioning at the start of the year, which enabled a lot of front loading. And then the other thing that we're seeing is actually just a huge shift in trade flows. So China has picked up, in particular, to Europe with a significant boost in e-commerce to Europe that previously was not flying to Europe at all. So that is actually what we would consider additional in that case. But Julia?
Yes, absolutely. And on top of that, and also what you mentioned, that the tariffs were not that high as what we may have initially thought played a role, then also actually the AI boom has created like a need to transport those AI-related goods, which mostly travel by air. And then finally, also overall, trade has actually declined less than what everybody, not only us, but also the WTO and other institutions were expecting, like around April, May, June. And basically this kind of negative impact has been pushed a little bit further, and yeah, was not that bad after all. So it's a mix of those reasons, I would say.
Any other questions?
Hey everybody, it's Brian Harman from Aviation Business Middle East. Brendan, a question for you. You mentioned slot constraints in Dubai. Can you talk us through that a little bit more, if that's getting better?
I don't have the specifics on whether it's operationally improving for Dubai, but what Dubai was doing was ad hoc slots for specific cargo movements, and that creates a challenge for the flexibility that we were referring to. And any of these airports that we're paying attention to that are not applying the rules consistently, that creates a problem for air cargo to have the flexibility that we're looking for. So really just I'd have to go back and check whether operationally that's smoothed out or not in Dubai at this stage. But applying the same rule transparently, granting the historic slot rights, using the same principles across the board, whether that be passenger or cargo, is what we're looking for.
Graham?
Yeah, Graham Newton Airlines. Can you tell us, are the supply chain issues affecting cargo in terms of getting, new aircraft, having to keep on flying older aircraft and so forth?
Yes, absolutely. So the general challenges in getting the fleet renewed also apply to air cargo, and that is both because of the delays in getting new aircraft, but also because basically passenger aircraft are not anymore converted to cargo as early as they used to be, and then less and less overall. And if you want to hear more on this, I would invite you to come tomorrow to Cargo Media Day. There I have an extra slide on that. Thank you.
Any other final questions? No? Then thank you everybody. We'll go to a coffee break now. If I could invite everybody to be back by 15:45, where we're going to talk about digital identity. Thank you.